Hi guys, Sam Marsden here from the Wolfhound channel. So today we'll be discussing chapter 2 of the book The Dyslexic Advantage. This chapter is entitled Dyslexia From Two Perspectives. And let's jump right into it. And we start off with Kristen and her family, mostly discussing her son to begin with, and her son scores both highly in verbal reasoning and in spatial reasoning. And to expand on what they are, verbal reasoning is the ability to think, understand, and reason about concepts framed in words. So it's about the ability to critically think and understand and reason in that format versus fluency or your vocabulary, for instance. And to give you an example of that, it can be something like a verbal analogy. So a car to a garage is the same as a ship to a dock. And that forms sort of the basis of verbal reasoning. Now, spatial reasoning, on the other hand, is the ability to think about objects in 3 dimensions and draw conclusions about those objects based on limited information. For instance, someone with good spatial awareness would be able to think about how an object would look when it's rotated. And that's something that I know is a strength of mine through the engineering I've done and the having to think about stuff fitting together and in 3 dimensions. The book then goes on to discuss about how her son struggles with both processing speed and working memory. And this is something that I can relate to because for me, it manifests itself in, if I'm trying to take information down from a board, for instance, or copy a word, I'll only be able to do it 2 to 3 letters at a time. Any more than that, and I'll make mistakes. And that's something that I still struggle with today. So the next part of the book is almost identical to my childhood, where it talks about how people with both good visual reasoning skills and verbal reasoning skills will enjoy things like fantasy literature, storytelling, creating their own worlds, and also being read to. And I can 100% agree with that. Whenever I was a kid, I loved fantasy novels, I still do. And one of my biggest ones that I loved was Terry Pratchett, and reading about or listening to his Discworld novels. And I can highly recommend them to anybody. But an interesting point that the book makes here is how people with that skill set and the difficulties they have with spelling tend to either be pushed or pulled towards things like the arts or engineering. Now, as someone who's a robotics engineer who also has a master's in mechanical engineering, yeah, I would agree with that. And I know a lot of other people in the industry who are dyslexic and who have gravitated towards engineering for that very reason. The book also talks about how people like this, whenever they're younger, they can easily learn the numbers at a very young age, but really struggle with their letters. Now, that is something I identify with, because for me, my parents would go through basically the alphabet with me every day, start to finish, until I got it right. And it was very frustrating, and the problem happened or occurred whenever I would finish it and get it all right, and we would stop. And that would be it. And then I would forget it all immediately afterwards. Whereas what really pushed me through that was whenever I got it right, actually going over it 4, 5, 6 times and ingraining it into my head, and offsetting the balance of all the times I got it wrong with now all the times I got it right. And that is something that really, really helped me. But the book goes on to also discuss other things that people can struggle with, dyslexic people can struggle with. And that is, for instance, remembering phone numbers, spelling, which I've also covered, but also understanding abstract concepts that are not easily visualized. So what do I mean by that? Things like quantum physics, I know I struggled with. Things like Laplace transforms, which is an engineering topic, and also imaginary numbers, which is prevalent throughout a lot of engineering. But Something the book highlights and something that I want to reinforce, the biggest challenge to dyslexic people and their creativity, their imagination, is being bored. Moving on. The next part of the book talks about how Kristen and her father and her son show symptoms of dyslexia, which draws parallels to my own life, where my father and my grandfather show strong symptoms of dyslexia, and that feeds into it being genetic and running in families. Now, we're going to bring it back to sort of how dyslexic people can struggle to remember phone numbers. And Kristen has an interesting way around this, where she can remember lots and lots of numbers, ones even way back in her childhood, through imagining typing them out on an imaginary keyboard. And that's using her strong visualization skills. And that's something that I use myself. And I've basically used it to develop a bit of a photographic memory, where I will remember things through visualizing them as objects. So if I have an equation, I'll visualize objects that represent that equation or facts, and then I imagine it inside my house, inside my head. And that allows me to remember up to 273 unique pieces of information, which comes in pretty handy for exams, to be honest. And that's something that any dyslexic person can really learn and remember. I recommend a good book by Darren Brown called Tricks of the Mind. Link in the description as normal, and that's something that you can learn in a matter of weeks easily. But to bring it back around to Kristen and her family, let's talk about her father, who is none other than James T. Russell, who invented the compact disc system. And that feeds right back into that narrative of a dyslexic person gets pushed towards engineering and then uses their dyslexia, their creativity, to really innovate. So let's talk about the link between dyslexia and talent. A big theme of the book here, and a big point that it makes, is that people with dyslexia succeed not in spite of their dyslexia, but because of their dyslexia. That in fact, the strengths that they have and the weaknesses that they have are two halves of the same neurological coin. Now, the book builds on this by discussing baseball, which I gotta tell you, I know nothing about. But it uses it as a metaphor when it describes how the top 100 home run hitters of all time in baseball also have some of the highest strikeout rates in all of baseball. And the reason for this? Well, whenever you're hitting with the force to hit a home run, whenever that's your strategy, that's your game plan, you're obviously going to struggle sometimes to hit the ball, and you're going to strike out because it's just the price that you pay. And that's the exact same for dyslexic people, where their neurological setup, their strengths, mean that they can excel in things like visualization and other skills, where they'll hit those home runs. But yeah, it sadly means that when it comes to things like spelling and grammar and working memory that we've talked about, they're also going to strike out. They're going to struggle. And that's what really this chapter's been about, and a main theme in this part of the book. So that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy the content I'm providing. And if you do, like and subscribe, hit the bell to stay notified. And until then, I'll see you next time.